Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on our webinar, Design and Next Generation Supply Chain, How to Get Started. We have two wonderful guest speakers today, Dave Kurtz from CorpU, who's our Supply Chain Product Lead, and Lora Cecere, Founder and CEO of Supply Chain Insights. We want to make this session as interactive as we possibly can, address all of your questions, let you interact with Lora. So please note these audio controls. First of all, we have you all on mute, and we'll keep you on mute as our presenters are speaking. And if you want to ask a question, there are a couple ways to do it. What we need you to do is to make sure that you have the right button selected on this audio panel. So if you've dialed by telephone, make sure you have this telephone audio button selected. If you're using the mic and speakers on your laptop, make sure that you have that audio button selected. It's important for when we want to unmute you to ask a question. But let's show you two ways that you can ask a question. If you raise your hand, we'll try to come to you live and let you speak. You can always, though, type a question into the question box. And between all of us who are moderating and interacting with Lora, we'll make sure that your question gets put to her immediately. So now I want to turn it over to our first speaker, Dave Kurtz, who I said is managing the supply chain product for CorpU, and he'll frame the solution a little bit and then introduce Lora, and then we'll get going.
Thanks a lot, Sue, and welcome everybody. Glad to have you all here. I just have a very few short comments just to frame up our distinguished guest here. I think everyone on the webinar is aware of the challenges we face as supply chain professionals and leaders. We've got complexity, competition. We've got to be agile and adaptable of how we take action. So the real question is, how do we respond to these challenges? Supply chain leaders have access to advice on consulting. You've got access to vendors and support for technology solutions. It's hard to pull those together into an integrated solution, though, across all of those different dimensions. So the real question is, are you able to take actions to improve and activate the power of the people side of your supply chain transformation? So CorpU, I like to say, is born of frustration with the status quo in corporate learning and performance. So we asked the question of, what if you could create a way to improve collaborative performance faster? So using experts to help frame issues, providing tools and ideas as catalysts, but generating that focused dialogue of people in the supply chain organization to help solve problems and find value. That's the what if. And our customers are saying the platform and process helps accelerate collaborative performance, and we know from research and practice that's a key ingredient to unlocking end-to-end supply chain performance. So it's never been a question of should we improve collaboration, it's a question of how. We think the CorpU platform and process is part of the answer to that, but we're not going to be showing you a lot of that in detail today, but we just want to mention it's a key part of the overall solution. But speaking of experts, let's get to our today. So we're thrilled to have Lora Cecere with us. Lora needs no introduction in the world of supply chain, founder of Supply Chain Insights, author of important and best-selling books on supply chain, and is that important strategic voice of thought leadership in supply chain. So we're very excited to announce this new series of short collaborative experiences called Next Generation Supply Chain. These experiences are going to allow your own company leaders and teams to be guided by Lora's ideas and apply them to your own business challenges. So today, Lora will tell us about the series. She'll give you some highlights of the work that she's done that's included in the series. I want to emphasize what Sue just mentioned, in that please feel free throughout the conversation today to send in your questions for us in that question box or raise your hand. And with that, I will turn it over to Lora.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. One of the things that I wanted to do was to help companies to make the leap to the next generation supply chain. So in my search to find a partner to build a guided learning platform, what became clear to me was that the current process we had in the industry of thinking we had traditional best practices and certifying employees on those practices really did not help us to adapt, to learn new technologies, or to build outside-in processes, or to become market-driven. So I was asked by companies as to what could we do together to be able to help to drive the learning of an organization to make the digital pivot, and that's what led me to CorpU. Next slide. So when I looked at this, I wanted to say, you know, what could we do together? And so we brainstormed 7 classes that we'll start with, and our belief is that we can start with these 7 classes and add a class a quarter through the next couple of years based upon a research engine that helps companies to benchmark, share case studies, ideate, and really drive learning. And the 7 classes, which are designed as short sprints, which are 5 days, and we're asking employees to spend 45 minutes in a cohort of 30 to 50 people, is really focused against metrics and metrics alignment, which helps companies move from a functional orientation to a cross-functional view. Customer-centric supply chains, which are focused on who's the customer, how do I align policy with customer segmentation, how do I think about new forms of digital marketing to be able to sense customer needs and align the supply chain. The market-driven value network journey that looks at demand sensing and dependent demand, the concepts around demand-driven replenishment, and how do we build multi-tier supply chains. Making the digital pivot, which looks at how do I think about the new world of analytics, the new world of 3D printing, the new processes that are possible, and really ideate around the supply chain for growth. End-to-end orchestration, which looks at how do I build global supply chains, how do I manage governance, how do I design supply chains end-to-end from the customer's customer, the supplier's supplier. And then how do I rethink planning as we think about new capabilities of cloud and concurrent optimization and prescriptive and cognitive learning? What's planning look like, and what do planning organizations look like, and how do companies design planning and assess if they're doing planning well? And then how do I build agility through horizontal processes? And the horizontal processes that we focus on are revenue management, which looks at bifurcated trade, demand shaping effectiveness, sales and operations planning, new product launch, how we build that through the stage gates, supplier development, and corporate social responsibility. So the horizontal processes help us to drive alignment. Now, in the classes, we have used the CorpU platform, which is designed to facilitate learning, and we've brought in case studies that I've collected over the last 5 years. These are videos, they're written case studies, so that you can see companies and how they're applying the principles. But also in the class, we're moving the research that we've built under the last 5 years of research and the 6,000 responses to provide online benchmarking. So every class has 2 assessments, which allows you to look at things like where are you on sales and operations planning balance, or where are you on organizational alignment, or where are you on agility, or where are you on hands-free orders. And it allows you in each class to have 2 benchmarking assessments. So as you go through 7 classes and you line up cohorts, you can see where is the organizational readiness in regions of the world, or perhaps regions or product lines, so you can look and you can build that organizational muscle. It also helps companies to talk a new language, the language of demand, the language of digital analytics, and to ideate together and build organizational readiness. And then the facilitators, as part of the CorpU program, actually drive guided learning. So the concepts are given through a combination of videos and case studies and assessments, and then the facilitator drives guided learning through an online program so that it can be virtual. And I know that lots of companies are under a lot of pressure for travel, and clients have a lot of conflicting objectives, but this is designed designed as short sprints, 45 minutes for a 5-day period for each of the classes in a facilitated work stream. And on Friday, or the 5th day of the class, there's a faculty member, and it's either myself or people that I've trained, that will actually facilitate the cohort that's gone through the training to be able to drive a higher level of insight, either through innovation tournaments or ideation kinds of exercises that are embedded in the training. The class is based upon research insights, so all of the surveys that we've done, and it's really designed to drive strategy activation. And so you might say that, and you might say, well, what do we mean by that? So the concept is that the classes can be designed in a sandwich, so that perhaps you have a program, you're going through a merger and acquisition, or you've got an imperative, a new channel, or you're trying to roll out to a new segment. The leader of the supply chain can work with CorpU to really capture the vision. So a person can do a short sprint around what's the vision and why is that important. And then after the participants take the classes, which allow you to have the online benchmarking and the guided learning, and the classes are these 7 classes, you get a summary of execution of where are your cohorts and what are the ideas from the cohorts, and it rolls it up for you. So for example, if you have an organization of 10,000 people around the world, perhaps you would like to see, what are the ideas of China, or the ideas of South America, or what's happening in Africa, or perhaps what's happening in a different business unit, so that then you can tie it up into an execution document that looks at where are we on benchmarking, where are we on ideas, where are we in organizational readiness around the world, and what does that mean for execution strategy. So it's a different approach. One of the things that I struggle with is people talk about training and they talk about learning, but many times people are stuck in a paradigm of, I'm going to have individuals take training, and this could be the APICS training or the CSCMP training, which is very focused around historic traditional processes that are based upon certification. But that doesn't necessarily help us to move to outside next generation supply chain thinking, and doesn't really help to build the organizational muscle or to align what's happening in the cohorts to the vision. So this is a different approach. It's one that we've worked together on to build the classes, and it's one that I'm very excited about because it combines all the research that we've done, and the digital books are available to support the classes, so that it's rich with the research studies, and it's rich with the case studies and the work that we've done. And we insert the reports into the classes so that people have reports, and they have the podcast, and they have the videos from our conferences, so that it isn't just an academic course. It's not something that's in isolation. It's really designed to help the average Joe. It's designed to help the supply chain organization that would like to make the digital pivot but doesn't know how to talk the language, or the company that wants to be market-driven but can't talk the language of demand, or the company that really wants to help to bring up talent to the next level to be able to drive against a mission imperative. And the reason why I think this is so important is, if you look at supply chain, only 10% of companies are making improvement, and every year we look at the financial performance of companies on key metrics that drive market capitalization and market to tangible book, and these are return on invested capital, growth, inventory turns, operating margin, and we study the patterns of these, and this is called the Supply Chains to Admire work, and we're getting ready to release this for July, and about 25 companies will make the standard of driving performance higher than the peer group for these metrics, but also driving improvement. And it requires performance higher than the peer group and also improvement. And what we're doing is we're studying this by industry NAAQS codes. And the NAAQS codes allow us to look at a group by industry, and we're studying the patterns. And so this is very characteristic of what we see. These are chemical leaders. This is Dow and DuPont, and one of the things that people get in the class are orbit charts of a company versus its peer group. So imagine that you're either Dow or DuPont and you're going through this class. This orbit chart allows you to see the comparison and pattern of two important metrics that have a high correlation to market cap and market tangible book. And so if you look at these charts, the diamond in the center tells you the average for Dow for the period of 2006 to 2015. So they had an operating margin of 6%, and they also had an average inventory turn of 7.67. But the averages don't tell the story. What tells the story are the patterns. So if you look at the year-over-year pattern of 2006 to 2007, 2008, ending in 2015, you can see that Dow at 2014 was at the same level of operating margin, but was at a lower level of inventory turns than they were in 2006. So think about that. That's, you know, almost a decade later. And look at DuPont, a similar story where you've got a decline in margin and you've also got a decline in inventory turns. And this is not unusual. We find that 90% of companies have a pattern that look like this. And this is automotive, and so a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to lean out my supply chain and I will drive success. But the question I have for companies is, if we were leaning out the supply chain and this drove the success that we think that it does, why is Toyota at the same place in 2014 that they were at 2006? And why do we see a similar pattern with Honda? So these are orbit charts for the automotive industry for Toyota and Honda. And what we want to do is we want to drive a pattern like Novo Nordisk. So again, we've got to compare peer group, and this is Eli Lilly compared to Novo Nordisk. Novo Nordisk has got an average performance that's lower than Eli Lilly in operating margin, but they're better in turns. They're better in operating margin, but they're lower in turns. But look at Novo Nordisk is making improvement, whereas Eli Lilly is not. And so the patterns matter. And what we're trying to do is, in the Metrics That Matter class, is help people to look at year-over-year improvement against their peer group and performance, and to be able to say, what can we learn from this? You know, if we take, for example, Emerson versus Schneider Electric, two comparison peer group companies, you can see Emerson is making improvement, whereas Schneider is going backwards. So if this was a class with Schneider Electric, we would be facilitating in the program a discussion with the Schneider employees about what happened. What do each of these years represent? What decisions happened? You know, was it a merger and acquisition? Was it a failed project? Was it a change in direction of leadership? And what can we learn about supply chain direction? So that's the kind of online assessment and the metrics that matter. One of the reasons why I wanted to build this program was to help people to facilitate a higher level dialogue. This is also an assessment that is in the class, which helps to look at organizational readiness, about what is the business pain. This is based upon over 500 respondents and really says, what is the current level of business pain that you're experiencing, and what is it? Is it demand supply volatility? Is it cross-functional alignment? Is it supply chain visibility? Is it ability to get to data? And one of the assessments looks at how long does it take your organization to get to data versus a peer group organization, and the current availability of skilled people to do the job. So in the class, you would be able to see your organizational business pain versus your peer group, and that helps to drive a discussion. And the discussion is what we're after, is to really catalyze a different level of discussion. Another assessment tool is horizontal team alignment. We find that when companies have better alignment between sales and operations, they're able to better drive the metrics that matter. So one of the assessments that comes out of the class is, how are you aligned functionally, and what does that mean? And what kind of programs could help you close the gap between sales and operations, and what does that mean? And this is an example of a case study. This is a Lenovo case study around listening, and one of the things we talk about is how to build listening, cross-functional listening, and use unstructured data and mine social sentiment. And we try to take the assessments, the metrics that matter work that we've done, along with the case studies to really drive a different level of discussion. So Sue and Dave, I don't know if we have any questions.
Yeah.
Maybe we can stop
yeah,
here.
We actually do, yeah, to pause here. So we have a question from Susan, and she's asking, can we use the orbit charts for a segment of a business rather than just at the entire company level?
Absolutely. We have a lot of clients who will take a division or perhaps a supply chain and do the same methodology by division. And what we do is we sign an NDA so that we never share that data outside of the learning. But I actually find that that really helps a cohort, because if you take the company that is complex, let's say Johnson & Johnson took the class, you would want to look at part of the Johnson & Johnson company by pharmaceutical, or part by medical device, or part by consumer goods, and breaking that out helps the people in the cohort to understand performance and improvement. And that's a great question. Thank you for the question, Susan. Other questions?
So I just had one quick one, Laura. So the one aspect of the Metrics That Matter course that was intriguing is this benchmarking reporting, and you showed a couple of examples of that. So how do you see participants using those benchmarking reporting tools, or the actual outcomes that you're providing them, or we're providing them, as participants in the course in their own organizations? What can they do with those reports that you've seen to be successful when they go back?
Well, one of the things that I think is important when we define a program for supply chain excellence is to define what does excellence mean. And the first thing we have to determine is what is the right target for a particular metric. So one of the things I often find is people have unreasonable targets for inventory. Inventory is the most important buffer in the supply chain. And if we don't have the right targets, sometimes we will cut the inventory and we'll cut the meat. And so people struggle, well, what is a reasonable target? And where am I versus a peer group, and what's possible? So the orbit charts and the comparison to peer group allow that discussion to really be balanced with 10 years worth of data. You know, it's unreasonable for a medical device supply chain to think that they'll have the inventory turns of Apple. It just is not feasible. And so we help companies through this process to set reasonable progress targets against their peer group, but also to look at what's possible over a period of time. How quickly can people drive change? What's reasonable? And we help them to take a functional orientation to metrics and look at cross-functional balanced portfolios. And then we help them to have the discussion with finance around how that drives market cap and market to tangible book. And one of the issues that a lot of the supply chain organizations struggle with is they want to have that discussion with finance, but they don't necessarily know what the metrics mean. They don't understand how does an inventory value compare to days of inventory, or how are inventory turns different than days of inventory, and why should I measure return on invested capital versus return on assets, and what is return on invested capital, and what is price to market to tangible book, and why does that matter? So one of the things that we want people to be fluent in at the end of the class is where are they on the metrics against the peer group, what's feasible, and how can they have a meaningful discussion with finance, and how do we take the discussion around metrics away from just a functional discussion to really be able to drive value. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. So we've got another question from Robert, who is asking about the the number of attendees. So just to clarify a little bit about this, the format. So this is a virtual learning experience, Robert. And Lora, do you want to comment on what kind of target number of folks do you think going through the experience do you think makes sense from an impact perspective?
Yeah, so I think what makes sense is to sit down with the organization and look at what are you trying to do in strategy activation and think about the organization and how to chop it up into logical segments. I think you want at least 30 people in the cohort to drive the benchmarking, and I think 50 to 60 is probably the highest number of people in the cohort. You know, it's not limited so much on the platform as it is by, you know, just organizational dynamics. And then I would break that learning up by the supply chain type or the region or something driven by an organizational imperative like a new project, and set a plan so that the cohorts can take a class. Maybe you'd have 7 cohorts taking metrics that matter, and then maybe do a facilitated readback to the company about what did you learn through those 7 cohorts. And so it's a way to build guided learning and organizational muscle. So think about 30 to 50 people in a training program at a time. Does that help?
That was great. And Robert, let us know if that did answer your question or not. And other folks, please go ahead and add your questions into that question box. So we'd be glad to help out with that. We'll take one more question, and then we'll be, okay, thanks, Robert. And then we'll go to part 2 of today's presentation. We've got a little bit that Lora would like to share with you about the talent strategy side of things. So one last question, just from a maturity level perspective, Lora, are you seeing that in your experience in working with companies around the metrics piece, is there a certain maturity level that organizations need to be performing at to really receive benefits from this approach?
I think that the clearer the group is on their role and what is supply chain excellence, the better the class can help them. And the class is designed for senior manager to director level to really help to drive alignment against that vision and to drive the organizational muscle to think about what's reasonable on a balanced portfolio. It's one thing to say supply chain excellence, it's another thing to define it. It's one thing to say a balanced portfolio, it's another thing to define it. And so what this helps is to build a guiding coalition to help define supply chain excellence so that then it can be driven to activation in either customer policy or supply chain design. And so that senior manager director level, and also if you've got maybe people that have been in other functions, maybe sales and they're coming to customer service, or perhaps you've got a sales account team that's doing a lot of work with a retailer. The classes can help there as well to help people to be more familiar with supply chain thinking. So I hope that helps.
Great, great. So I've got one question here from Suresh, and Suresh, we might need you to add just a little bit more detail here. But what he's asking is, does the orbit chart provide for a consistent diagnostic method? And Lora, let Suresh know if that's enough of a question or if we have to dig a little bit more deeply into that.
Well, I think the orbit chart is part of a diagnostic, and that's why we try to have the financial diagnostic along with the research benchmarking to look at organizational behavior. So the orbit chart helps to start the conversation of, is this organization driving improvement? Is this organization at the peer group level that other in the competitive set are at? Could you do better? Or what were the factors that drove a misalignment? So it starts the discussion. But the online benchmarking helps you to really assess your organizational capabilities or start to build the organizational muscle. How balanced are you in S&OP? How resilient are you? How aligned are you organizationally? What are your business drivers? How effectively can you get at data versus your peer group? Where are you on supply chain visibility? how effectively can you move hands-free orders? So every class has 2 assessments, which allows you to look at, how effective is your supply chain to your peer group. So the combination of the orbit charts, the assessments, the online facilitation, the ideation tournaments allow you to really start to build a guiding coalition to say, this is where we're at, and this is where we want to go. And that's hard to get at, in a package.
That was great. Okay, so let's move on to our part 2 here. And Laura, back to you. We're going to now talk about supply chain and talent.
So, the missing link in the supply chain, I think, is talent. And when we think about the supply chain group, often we'll see a door like this one with a sign that says supply chain. But when I talk about supply chain and supply chain talent, I'm just not talking about a group that does customer service or logistics. I'm talking about the supply chain as the engine of growth. I'm talking about the supply chain from the customer's customers to the supplier's supplier. So I'm talking about not just building an organizational capability within a limited function of supply chain. I'm talking about really building the processes that allow the organization to have agility and to be proactive, to sense demand, adapt demand, and to really redesign to be outside in to drive the next generation multi-tier response. Next slide. And so when we look at talent, there are a number of reports about how many people will be short in 2030. I've read that will be a ratio of 3 to 1. I've read it's even 7 to 1 that will actually need in terms of mid-management talent. And a supply chain is not a supply chain, and this is one of the headaches I have as a researcher, is that everybody's supply chain is slightly different. And so that's why I think the research benchmarking is so important, is to help people to think more broadly about supply chain. And 70% of companies have a formal supply chain organization today, and the supply chain organization is about 15 years old. And most companies are very focused around traditional supply chain processes and driving continuous improvement on these traditional processes. And one of the issues is that we have really gotten the bang for the buck on those traditional processes, but 90% of supply chain leaders are flattening out on their ability to drive the metrics that matter. And so how do we drive continuous improvement in supply chain excellence through supply chain centers of excellence? Because we have 1/3 of companies with a supply chain center of excellence, but only 50% say that it's effective. And that's a very low success rate. And supply chain excellence is easier said than accomplished. So one of the things we want to do in the course is build talent so that there is an organizational understanding of excellence and help companies to design the supply chain to be more responsive using new techniques. Next slide. And so as we think about the supply chain talent issue, our gaps in the supply chain are pretty large. We have 5 major drivers in talent today, and often people will think about talent as how do I get kids out of colleges into entry-level jobs, but that is not our issue. Our issue is that our open positions are in mid-management jobs, and 15% of the positions are open on average, and I've watched over the time I've studied talent, the number of months that jobs will stay open will be used to be 9 months, now it's 12 months in planning. And so we have an issue of the fact that we cannot just go recruit talent, we've got to build it. Now the drivers for this talent gap are really a number. One is we have the graying of the supply chain workforce. So the first and second generation supply chain pioneers are retiring, folks like me. We also want to build global supply chains, and most of the capabilities for academic assistance for the supply chain are in Europe and North America. So there's a lot of pain that global companies have about how do I build supply chain competency in Asia and South America and Africa where I'm experiencing growth. And then the third thing is supply chains are more important, and so there's a demand for supply chain talent, and people are struggling to fill that demand. And, you know, as we think about driving global supply chains, working on this mid-management talent gap and the readiness of the organization to really use the supply chain as a growth engine, this is what we're talking about for talent. It's just not training a single individual. It's really building the organizational muscle. Next slide. And so we only find that 18% of companies have a clear strategy. And many companies are not clear that the biggest gap is in this middle management talent area. It's the senior management, it's the director level, it's the folks that not only can embrace new technologies and new processes, but understand your processes. We have less of an issue of getting college graduates out of college curriculums. Where we have our huge opportunity is this mid-management talent gap, and aligning the talent to activation for the next generation supply chain. Now, just an example, if we look at the next slide, what we see is that where we have the biggest issue is where we have a need for analytics, and we also have a need for deep process understanding. So this is taking the area of planning and execution and looking at the difficulty of filling a career or job in a certain job path. And if we look at this, you can see that the easiest jobs for us to fill are in supply chain execution, manufacturing planning, transportation planning, customer service. But where we have the intersection of analytics and planning, where we need to be cross-functional and we need to be able to think more strategically and use analytics tools, we struggle the most with building talent. And the classes are designed to help people think holistically, to think about new forms of analytics, to think about planning, to think about what do we do to really drive value. And so as people think about, you know, what they could build as a cohort, because one of the action items out of this webinar are ambassadors to help us to refine the program, you should think about a cohort at this intersection of analytics and planning, holistic supply chain thinking, maybe your supply chain center of excellence. And what we're looking for are companies that can work with us in co-development in one of the classes. And what that means is that you would pick 30 to 50 people for a cohort, and then you would have access to the program to trial it with the agreement that you would give us feedback to refine it. And then what we'll do is we'll take all of the feedback from the ambassadors to finalize the programs, and we will be rolling out the 7 courses at the Supply Chain Insights Global Summit in September for commercialization and sale. So I hope that's helpful. Any other questions we have right now?
I have one to jump in with. In conversations with organizations around supply chain performance, it often comes up this idea of how do I improve end-to-end performance in my organization? I just wondered if you could just comment on how the impact of this talent piece, especially this middle management layer, you know, trying to build that more holistic viewpoint, you know, how could that possibly help organizations improve this huge challenge but great strategic need to become more integrated and more end-to-end in their supply chains?
Yes, so, you know, as we think about the supply chain, it's more complex in this decade than it was in the past decades. And we've been at supply chain management for 3 decades. You know, it's more global, it has more tiers, it has greater variability. We're trying to do more with products and profiles and localization. And so we have more complexity. And the techniques of yesteryear don't work so well. And so we have the long tail, we have greater bullwhip effect, we have supplier viability issues, and we need to think about, how do we manage demand differently? How do we use new forms of analytics so that we can get prescriptive and cognitive analytics to work for us? And how do those new analytical tools apply for clouds or streaming data or data pools so that we can build insights, because the supply chain is rich with data and low on insights. But as we think about making that kind of pivot for the end-to-end, Dave, based upon what you're thinking, the traditional definition of the tightly integrated, efficient supply chain is not effective. What we've got to do is we've got to synchronize and harmonize data and focus on independent demand and decreasing the bullwhip effect and designing the supply chain for agility and proactivity. And that requires us to look at customer segmentation. It allows us to be prescriptive about item complexity. It requires us to be really good at the use of analytics, and it requires us to manage metrics holistically. Because most organizations manage metrics within a function, what they'll do is they'll throw the supply chain out of balance. And so the classes are designed to help people with end-to-end holistic thinking and to apply those theories into design and the selection of technologies. Does that help?
That's great. That's great. I want to pick up on one thing you mentioned about the data analytics and being able to really leverage that situation. So when we talk to organizations about trying to become more data-driven, they're often confused a little bit about what skill sets they need to be able to take advantage of that more analytic-driven approach in supply chain. So, do I need more data scientists or do I need more domain knowledge? And usually, I think it's a combination of the two. But I would love for you to comment on that challenge a little bit. How do organizations move the needle on becoming more analytics savvy, especially given some of the constraints around talent right now?
Well, I think there's a misconception that we'll fuel the supply chain on data scientists. We need process-based capabilities, and we need to allow the predictive, prescriptive, cognitive analytics to work for us. So if you look at the evolution of optimization, we put in a lot of tools that we don't use. We rely heavily on Excel spreadsheets. And why do we do that? Well, linear optimization to manage a nonlinear system doesn't work very well. And so our advanced planning systems that we put in the 1990s and the last decade were okay for a regional supply chain that was not real complex. But as we deal with global supply chains, we need to be able to use analytics and make them work for us. We need to build rules-based ontologies that automatically adapt with master data. We need to look at prescriptive and cognitive analytics that allow supply chains to think as we sleep. We need to not just give planners exceptions, but insights about what to do with those exceptions. And we need people that can use the data because they understand the process to be able to apply the insights. And we need executives who understand that it's important to be proactive versus reactive. Today I was talking to a company that's doing some very cool things with analytics and using rules-based ontologies and cognitive learning to really drive proactivity. And one of the things they're struggling with are the current reward systems. Because they're rewarding people to be reactive, it's really hard for them to use the proactive tool sets. And most people struggle to let analytics do the work. And one of the things that we address in the class are the change management issues to let analytics work for you. First, we have to understand them, then we've got to test them, and then we've got to train the organization, but then we need to let analytics do the heavy lifting, and we need to adapt them over time. And I think that's a different mentality than many companies have, because they've implemented the analytics as a technology implementation, not necessarily building core organizational capabilities to use analytics. And that's part of what we work on in the class, is how to think about that. The new analytics are just not a technology implementation, it's really building core capabilities.
Right, that's really interesting. And so Susan has a follow-on question to that. So she's asking, what have you seen to be effective in getting senior leaders to get better at using analytical tools available she often hears the assertion that leaders, quote, don't have time to run reports on their own and expect lower level employees to do this for them.
Absolutely, and lower level employees today with today's system struggle to get data. You know, I work with some companies that take 3 and 5 days to even run a report. So Susan's question is really a good one. But if we look at in-memory visualization and we look at what's happening with cloud-based computing and visualization of the supply chain, some of our new visualization tools actually boil down the current events of supply chain into infographics or action items for executives, and they're able to be created for devices, either your phone or your iPad, so that they can have the information on the go. One of the issues is yesterday's technologies were too hard to use for executives. They, had to learn what a screen was and what all of this terminology was that they really didn't have time for. So in the new forms of cloud-based visualization, it helps the executive to be able to get to data at the right time in a way that they can make it more usable. And I'm hoping that it helps the supply chain organization to build organizational muscle for people that can use the new technologies to be able to make better decisions and to be able to drive the supply chain at the cadence of the market. I hope that helps.
Very cool. And so I have one quick question to follow up on that. Sue and I were just talking about this. So do you see this mechanism of bringing people together in courses like the ones that we're talking about as a way of actually maybe opening up some of those conversations across levels in organizations to maybe bring domain knowledge and technical knowledge of tools together so that they can solve some of these, and maybe just make sure they're asking the right kinds of supply chain strategy questions so that they're applying the analytics to the right aspects of the business?
Absolutely. So I recently flew to Singapore to work with a large global supply chain team, and they brought their leaders, and we had to start with, let's learn a different language and let's learn a different way to think about supply chain processes. And that was very uncomfortable for people that have been in the supply chain world for 30 years, right? Who maybe grew up in manufacturing or procurement and felt very comfortable. And, when I talk about some of the new forms of analytics or new processes, they feel uncomfortable. So we have to help them to feel comfortable, and we have to help them with the why. Why is it important for us to think about new ways of working? And, it helps us to better sense what customers want. It helps us to reduce costs. But more importantly, it helps us to drive value. And the traditional supply chain was chartered to drive cost. And the supply chain today is really chartered to drive value. And the supply chain leader feels uncomfortable because that's a major transformation for them. So after we help them to get out of the uncomfortability, it helps them to become much more aligned and enlightened to be a capable leader to drive this evolution.
So we're going to take a step back here, and we're going to actually back up a couple of slides as well. But while we're doing that, I have another question from Robert, who is interested in your opinion on this idea of focusing on alignment within the organization. And so he's asking if you've heard of John Gatorna's approach to dynamic supply chain alignment, and he's kind of curious what your thoughts might be about that approach.
Yeah, so I've worked with John. I actually am a speaker at John's conferences. I have a lot of respect for John's work. I don't actually reference John's book in the classes, but I think that the teaching here is very much about customer segmentation and alignment against the flows of the supply chain based upon segmentation. And this is an example of a screen in the class. So what happens is there are videos, and the videos are animated, and we basically take the research, and I think one of the things CorpU does really well is the animation of the research so that Gen X and millennials, people that have short attention spans can learn really quickly. But yes, I know John, and I think the classes are very much in alignment with what John is advocating.
Okay, so yeah, we didn't have a chance to show you, we're not showing a demo of the actual way the courses work, but as we mentioned earlier, we don't have time to show the actual how we deliver the experience, but there is this unique and focused way of driving team collaboration. Again, it's one thing to just have great content, great research, but driving action and really getting folks to collaborate and do some problem solving together, that's really the big point here with this image. You know, we're asking folks to watch, we're asking them to read and reflect and really assess and take that data that they're getting from the course and apply it to their own situation. But it's really about getting them to think about what is that effective frontier in our own organization and how can we get there. And Lora actually mentioned the idea tournaments. These are just really teasers to give you a sense of what some of the reporting looks like. Think of this as a way of focusing and energizing the crowd-based ideas in the organization. You've got these cohorts of 30 to 50 people that are going through this guided paced experience together, and they're getting a chance to really think about and generate ideas that are focused on your own organizational opportunities for cost savings and value creation. As Lora mentioned, the value creation aspect is super important as well. And then there's also an idea of network performance. So we talk about this an awful lot. There's individual task performance, how well individuals do in their own jobs and learning how to be the best transportation manager they can or the best demand planner. But there's also this idea of being a network performer, of trying to improve the performance of those around you. So the opportunity that working in this web-based virtual space allows us is to generate these analytics and insights from your groups and your teams of your people that are going through these experiences, and then it goes way beyond just simple supply chain training at this point. It gives you something really to work with. We're wrapping up here in a few minutes, so I want to encourage anyone that has a last-minute question for Lora to pop that into that question box. And as we're doing that, we're going to pull up a couple of things on the ambassador program. I'm going to turn it back to Sue to offer that to you.
Thanks, Dave and Lora. And as Dave said, if you have any further questions, please send them in. But we wanted to give you some insight into how you can become an ambassador in the ambassador program. And we got a lot of great companies signed up for this. We want you to be able to see and experience the CorpU technology, the CorpU collaboration experience, and especially Lora's great content, insights, benchmarking, new tools, new ideas, the things that are going to help your supply chain not only build great talent, as she said, great middle managers, but begin to take those first steps toward envisioning and then eventually executing on a next generation supply chain. So you see her 7 topics on the right. We are inviting people as ambassadors to bring 30 to 50 people from their supply chain into this virtual 1-week experience. It only requires about 3 hours of work, but it's spread out over a 1-week period, as Lora mentioned. And then you'll get the insights from the CorpU technology about how your organization is coming together, networking, sharing ideas, generating those value-creating opportunities through the idea tournaments and so on, as well as the benchmarks from Lora's research and the tools that she's going to put together in each one of those modules for you to use to plot out the course from today to tomorrow. And all of that is free for you to try, to experience. We just ask that you provide us feedback to Lora, to us, about the content, about the experience, and that's all that we're asking. And so as we wrap this up, I'll let Dave and Lora pick it up from here. I'm going to leave this slide up on the screen so that you can, if you want to learn more about the Ambassador Program, if you want to see the real experience, have us demonstrate it to you, show you how it works, just contact us at either one of these opportunities. Call a phone number or come to our website and sign up.
So, Lora, we have one quick last question from Orestes I want to jam in here if we can, just in 1 minute or less. Do you think young graduates fit in the organization? How do you think young graduates fit in the organization in terms of designing and building the next generation supply chain? Can they offer value? How can they offer value?
Well, I see a lot of people forming in what I call scrappy teams that allow people to take people that have been in supply chain for a while, people that are very conversant with new technologies and maybe out of school, and ideate across generations and across technologies. So these classes are designed for those folks as well.
Great, great. And that brings us to a close for today. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and certainly follow up. If you have questions, reach out to us for further information on anything you've heard or seen today. And I want to thank Lora for her insights and the interesting conversation we've had today. And thank you for your questions. Those are great questions, and look forward to continuing the dialogue with you all. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.